Hi, everybody. My name's Kristen Fletcher. I'm the Programs and Engagement Manager here at the Haley Public Library. Tonight's talk, Pick Your Poison, Tetrodotoxin, is the fourth in an occasional series with forensic chemist Cat Helms. Cat will explore this extremely potent poison found in pufferfish, and those fish are actually eaten as a delicacy in Japan. I always like to feature a book that we have here at the library. The only thing we really had was a kid's video about a little puffer fish that got lost, and mom and the two kids tried to help it find its way. But Cat highly recommends something that we don't have, which is a book called The Serpent and the Rainbow, a Harvard scientist's astonishing journey into the secret societies of Haitian voodoo, zombies, and magic by Wade Davis. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Cat Helms. Cat has a bachelor's degree in psychology from Vanderbilt University, and she also has a bachelor's degree in forensic chemistry from Virginia Commonwealth University, where she also served as the forensic toxicology laboratory manager. In 2008, she received a Master of Science degree in molecular medicine from the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. She has significant experience as a science and math tutor and currently owns Cat Does Science, which provides local academic support and study strategies in math and science to middle school and high school students. So welcome again, Cat. And I want to just take a very brief moment to thank you for suggesting this series. As you know, I was like, oh, I don't know, poison. I'm not sure about this, but you rather quickly convinced me that the chemistry and the stories behind these incredible poisons, I mean, like serious poisons, could actually be engaging and fun and educational, and it's due in large part to your talents as a presenter. So without further ado, I'm going to mute myself and let you take the stage. Thank you again very much, everybody, for being here tonight.
All right, well, Kristen, thank you as always for an excellent introduction, and thanks everybody for showing up to this one. Tetrodotoxin is one of my favorite toxins. I don't know if you can have a favorite, but this is one of my favorites. And so I'm excited to talk to you guys about that today. Tetrodotoxin, also known as killer sushi. So away we go. Oh, maybe. Oh no. There it goes. Okay. So when people think about tetrodotoxin, they're mainly thinking about the pufferfish. And the pufferfish is found in the family Tetrodotoxidae, which I never say correctly. But the little pufferfish there, the scientific name refers to the four large teeth that are fused in the upper and lower palates of this particular type of fish. And those large teeth are actually used to crush the shells of crustaceans and mollusks, which are their main diet. And also there's Mrs. Puff, and she's a very famous pufferfish from the SpongeBob SquarePants series. So you may recognize Mrs. Puff. She was always one of my favorites. She's the driving instructor at Bikini Bottom. So that's kind of a fun little aside. So the pufferfish and are toxic. Mainly it's their internal organs, specifically the liver and the ovaries, but sometimes the skin can contain this toxin as well. When pufferfish are threatened, their defense mechanism is to puff up, hence pufferfish. And so they suck up a bunch of water and they, become these little balls. So they have these extremely elastic stomachs, and that fills with water. Some of them have spines, which is even more of a deterrent. And so they're this big spiky ball, which a lot of predators are thinking, I don't want any piece of that. If the warning is ignored, the predator could be the victim of poisoning. There isn't really enough toxin in the fish to kill large predators like large sharks and things like that, but there is enough in there to kill a human. So fugu is a Japanese delicacy. It is the sushi made from the flesh of the pufferfish. And despite everyone knowing that the pufferfish is dangerous to eat, people still eat it. And the reason is because when you have fugu prepared properly, there's just enough toxin in there to give you this little tingling sensation on your tongue, and your fingers get this little peripheral tingling. And so it's kind of exciting. But you have to be super careful when you prepare this. It takes years to train as a sushi chef to create fugu. So don't get it from, some random gas station. That's probably a bad choice. So in 2002 to 2006, in Japan, 223 patients were poisoned and 13 died as a result of eating fugu. And in 2001 to 2006, Singapore had 53 patients that showed up to emergency rooms, and 8 of them died. So this toxin is no joke. All right, tetrodotoxin, which sometimes you'll see abbreviated as TTX, just because it's a long one to have to type out all the time. So it's one of the deadliest compounds known to man. It's more potent than arsenic, cyanide, or anthrax. And even though the pufferfish is the most common animal we think about, tetrodotoxin is also found in salamanders, frogs, crabs, sea stars, and some snakes. So there's a cute little puffer at the bottom, and next to it is the molecular structure of tetrodotoxin. So it's got a bunch of ring structures, a lot of alcohol R groups, and it's a pretty complex structure. Okay, so here's all the critters that have tetrodotoxin. So the one that we're really focusing on, of course, is the pufferfish. The blue-ringed octopus is also another very famous animal that is deadly, that has tetrodotoxin in its bite. And then you've got some frogs and salamanders and things like that. All right, moving on.
I have a quick question for you about that.
Sure.
So growing up, I was told that I shouldn't pick up like toads, or maybe it was salamanders, I've forgotten, because they were poisonous. Is that what they're talking about here?
It could be.
Okay.
Yeah, salamanders also excrete a lot of other toxins. So tetrodotoxin is just one on that list.
Okay.
So
All right.
where you are and what kind of species we're talking about. But yeah, if you can't identify a marine critter, I would just leave it alone.
Okay, thank you.
Poking at octopuses and things, that's not smart. Yeah, so so we're going to talk about the pufferfish, but there are other species out there just to be aware of. Don't mess with those. So we've talked about LD50s in the past. That's a lethal dose for 50% of a test population. And so in this particular case, it's 5 to 8 micrograms per kilogram. It is a tiny amount. 1 to 2 milligrams of pure tetrodotoxin is lethal to humans. And so this makes tetrodotoxin 120,000 times as deadly as cocaine and 40,000 times as deadly as methamphetamine. And again, the dose makes the poison. And in this case, a little tiny dose will do you in. So where does this toxin come from? Here's the fun thing. No one really knows. So it's thought that it comes from something in the diet of the pufferfish and the other animals that are exhibiting tetrodotoxin. It's thought it's bacteria, and it's part of their diet, because pufferfish bred in captivity don't have this toxin. And if you capture a wild pufferfish and you transfer it into captivity, it loses the toxin after a certain amount of time. We don't know how long. So if you catch a pufferfish and then you keep it in an aquarium and you start poking at it, I wouldn't recommend doing that, because you don't know how long it's going to take for that toxin to not be at high enough doses to give an effect to you. So yeah, so it's thought that it's probably a bacteria that's found in the diet of these marine creatures, but we're still not 100% sure. It's kind of fun. So what does exposure do? Well, it depends on the time after ingestion and is dose dependent. So remember that we talked about Paracelsus saying the dose makes the poison. This is a perfect example of that. So in most cases, symptoms begin within 30 minutes, and there are 4 grades of poisoning depending on the dose. And that little sign is, we have fugu, but eat at your own risk. So grade 1, this is paresthesias, perioral numbness, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and diarrhea. Paresthesias it's this burning, tingling sensation, which if you're having fugu, you kind of want. It's sort of that like exciting, little feeling you get. But if those paresthesias start moving other places, you have a serious problem. All right. So then we move on to grade 2. This is facial numbness, slurred speech, early motor paralysis, and incoordination with normal reflexes. So it's just going to get progressively worse. So hold on. Grade 3, generalized flaccid paralysis, aphonia, which is an inability to speak, respiratory failure, fixed and dilated pupils in a conscious patient. This is super, really weird. You do not see this really with anything else except death. So fixed and dilated pupils is how you can tell that someone is brain dead. But these victims of tetrodotoxin poisoning are still very much alive, but they have fixed and dilated pupils. It's such a strange symptom. And then we progress on to grade 4. You're in big trouble if you reach grade 4. You get severe respiratory failure, hypoxia, which is a deficiency in oxygen, bradycardia, which is an extremely slow heart rate, cardia dysrhythmias, which included irregular heart rhythm. Eventually, this leads to unconsciousness and eventually death. If you survive grade 4, however, you can recover in 24 hours. So, you kind of rolling the dice on this one, but it is possible to survive this. But however, if the dose is high enough, you could be dead within 20 minutes. So, if you choose to eat fugu, that's up to you, but, you're playing with your life a little bit there. And if you remember, we were talking about botulinum last time, and botulinum, similar to tetrodotoxin, doesn't affect the sensory system or cognitive ability. So you can experience locked-in syndrome. So you know that this is happening to you, but you are unable to do anything about it. Super disturbing. Okay, so now that we know the terrible things that happen when you're exposed to this toxin, why? Why does this happen? And it's because tetrodotoxin is a neurotoxin. And if you remember, a neurotoxin is a toxin that specifically targets the nervous system of the body. And this is a little diagram of a typical nerve cell. And so I'm going to use my little arrow here. There it is. So this is the cell body right here where the nucleus of the cell is. These are dendrites, these projections that come off the cell body here. And then you've got this long little piece here called the axon. And surrounding the axon are what are called myelin sheaths. It's not super duper important for this, but this is a way that it's like putting insulation around a wire. It makes the signal go faster. And then you have these axon terminals. And so what happens is you get a stimulus that turns on this nerve cell, and an electrical signal is sent down the axon. And once this electric signal hits the axon terminals, you have a chemical signal that is released in the form of neurotransmitter, and those neurotransmitters will bind with a receptor cell to make something happen. And in this particular case, the receiving cell is muscle cells. So tetrodotoxin binds to sodium channels on the nerve cells and stops them from opening. So this is the axon, if you remember, and we have to send an electrical signal down this section of the cell. And in order to do that, you need sodium channels, because when you open up sodium channels, positive sodium ions flood into the axon and cause what we call depolarization. And so the resting cell membrane is usually at negative 70 millivolts. And when you open up sodium channels, all these positive ions go flooding in, and it raises the electrical threshold of the cell, which propagates the electrical signal down the axon. And so this is how we get that electrical signal to travel from the cell body to these axon terminals. And from there, the axon terminal, this electrical signal causes these vesicles full of neurotransmitter. In this case, it's acetylcholine. And these vesicles fuse with the what's called presynaptic membrane and release into the synaptic cleft, which is the space between the pre and the post. And in this case, this is a muscle fiber. And so once acetylcholine is crossing the synaptic cleft and binds with what are called nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, it turns this muscle cell on and you get a contraction. And so that's some nerve cell stuff. That's basically the broad strokes of it, but that's how that happens. And so if you shut off sodium channels, you don't get any of this. So by turning off these sodium channels and blocking them, you don't get this electrical signal that you need to have your muscles contract. So to break it down for you, no sodium equals no action potential, which is the electrical signal traveling down an axon. No action potential means no acetylcholine. No acetylcholine means no muscle contraction. If you can't contract your muscles, you can't breathe, because the diaphragm, which controls your breathing and the expansion of your lungs and contraction to force air in and out, will not work. And if you can't breathe, you will die. So this is how tetrodotoxin works on a biochemical level. Any questions about that?
No, not yet. I opened up the chat, so if anybody wants to take a second, type something in, a quick question, and but thank you. I'll wait for just a sec, but thanks for walking us through that, know this, know that,
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, it's, if you block the first part of this cascade, everything that happens afterward will not happen. And so tetrodotoxin is unique in that it hits really high up on this pathway, versus botulism, which, if you remember, hits a little bit lower in this pathway and has a little bit of a different mechanism, but you end up getting something pretty similar as a result.
So you may cover this later, I'm not sure, but Colleen asks, why doesn't the pufferfish get poisoned by the toxin?
That is an excellent question. Thanks, Colleen. So the reason that pufferfish and all of the other animals that express tetrodotoxin do not see the effects of the toxin is because they have different types of sodium channels, and their sodium channels have been genetically modified so that the toxin is unable to bind to them. So the toxin really looks for specific types of sodium channels, and unfortunately, we have those sodium channels. But that's an excellent question. Yeah. So it's a genetic mutation in their sodium channels that allows them to carry this toxin but not be affected by it. So that was a good question.
Any other questions before we move on to the next part? All righty.
All right, moving on down. All right, so I don't know why it does that. Okay, ta-da. So how do you treat this? You don't. There's no antidote here. You have to do supportive care until the toxin is cleared by the body. Hold on, let me fix this. Okay. There it goes. Okay. All right. So you have to avoid eating pufferfish would be my advice, because the toxin is not removed by cooking. So yeah, and if you can't identify marine life, my advice would be leave it alone. If you are exposed to tetrodotoxin, it's basically going to be supportive care. So putting you on a ventilator, making sure that you can still breathe and, that you're having basic life support until you clear the toxin. But sometimes you cannot get to the emergency room in time because, like I said, if the dose is high enough, you could be dead within 20 minutes. So just, be careful, I guess. So I thought this was really fun. I can't even remember where I found this, but it made me laugh. So there's this pufferfish named Goldie who was living in this aquarium, and she didn't really like chewing on the coral and stuff that her, owner had provided. And so her teeth grew too big and she needed dental work. And so there's Goldie the pufferfish after her dental work. Look how happy she is with her 4 little teeth. And on the right is the vet doing the dental work. So they filled the aquarium water with a mild anesthetic And they came in and they drilled and made her teeth get a little bit smaller so that she could, open and close her mouth and continue to eat. And I just thought that was a really cute story. So there's Goldie the pufferfish. All right, so we're gonna take a hard left turn, and I was hoping that when we advertised this talk that Kristen wouldn't mention the zombie thing. And she didn't, thank goodness, because I wanted this to be both a surprise and also when people say zombies, some people are like, I don't want to hear about that. But this is such a fascinating story. I think it's worth being told. So Harvard Magazine, and I actually have the article right here, did an article about zombies. And of course, you think the Hollywood zombies, Night of the Living Dead kind of thing, but that's not really what we're talking about when we're talking about zombies. So I'm going to tell you this crazy story, and I hope you bear with me because it's fascinating. So in 1980, a man walked into Leicester in Haiti and approached a peasant woman named Angelina Narcisse and identified himself as Clairvius, her brother. And that's the man that you see right there. That's Clairvius Narcisse. I hope I'm saying that right. I don't speak French. 18 years earlier, Angelina watched her brother be buried in a cemetery nearby. So she saw him get buried 18 years earlier. He was fully conscious when he was lowered into the grave, but he couldn't speak or move. The scar on his right cheek came from a nail that was driven through his casket, and he still has that scar. That night, he was raised from the grave by a voodoo priest and was forced to work at a sugar plantation in northern Haiti as a slave. He was declared dead on April 30th, 1962, 3 days after being admitted to the hospital. So the story prompted Harvard ethnobiologist Wade Davis to investigate. He contacted, I'll move over here. So this is for real, I'm serious. And the book, The Serpent and the Rainbow, details all of this. And it's a fascinating read. I recommend it if you have a chance. It was released in 1985. But the story prompted Wade Davis to go to Haiti and see if he could figure out what was going on. So he contacted this guy named Marcel Pierre, who is a Bokor. And a Bokor is a voodoo priest. And Marcel created a sham recipe and gave it to Wade. And Wade knew that it was bogus because he tested it in his lab and it had nothing in there that would have caused any type of hallucinatory effects or any effects at all. It was just all for show, right? We're going to put some lizards in there. We're going to put some bones, right? And it was all to throw everybody off. And Marcel had given sham recipes to other researchers in the past. But Wade Davis was different. He was an ethnobiologist, and he was actually more interested in the culture of Haiti than just coming in and grabbing their secrets and running away with it. So Davis went back to confront Marcel about this sham powder that was supposed to be this tetrodotoxin, this zombie creating powder, and told Marcel, you need to show me what the real recipe is. And Marcel agreed. But during this confrontation, Marcel handed Wade Davis a little vial of powder, and Davis pretended to rub the powder on his skin. And after Marcel saw him do that, he said, "You're a dead man." But it turns out that Wade Davis had tricked him, and he didn't put any on his skin because it turns out that whatever was in that vial was the real deal. So the culture is that you would go to a Bokor and you would ask for this zombie powder, and it was just this little powder, and you had to apply it to the victim, and then the victim would basically be buried alive, and then you could dig them up and turn them into slaves or zombies. So Wade Davis watched Marcel prepare the real recipe, and he noticed that what he put in there were toads, sea worms, tarantulas, and human bones that were robbed from a child's grave, and dried pufferfish. And Wade Davis realized that the pufferfish was really the only ingredient in there that had any type of psychoactive properties. And after burial, victims are dug up and fed what's called datura, which is called the zombie's cucumber. And that's a type of plant that causes hallucinations, and makes you really easily suggestible. So, so there's Wade Davis, and this is what he did. And so he obtained a sample of the powder that was actually used in the ritual and had it analyzed by a lab. And sure enough, it contained tetrodotoxin from pufferfish and Datura stramonium, which is devil's cucumber. So, like I said, it produces delirium, bizarre behavior, hallucinations, and pronounced amnesia. So, Wade Davis wrote about all of this in his book, The Serpent and the Rainbow. I would recommend it if you are super interested in this topic and trying to, get more information about what I just told you, because it seems unbelievable. And when you read the book, it's a crazy tale about culture and the history of Haiti and how a lot of these voodoo rituals that were brought over from Africa during the slave trade are still maintained by the Haitian culture to this day. So Claudius, it turns out, was having a dispute with his brother over some land. And so his brother actually paid a Bokor to infect him with this powder. And then Claudius went to the hospital, was buried, and then this is what happened to him. So Wade Davis says tetrodotoxin and datura are only templates on which cultural forces and beliefs may be amplified 1,000 times. There are secret societies within Haiti that control specified territories of the country. It's just part of the culture there. And these secret societies police their communities, and zombification is a way to help maintain order. So there are voodoo priests who will do this if you pay them enough money, but it's highly frowned upon. And folks that come back as zombies are shunned by their communities, and their lives are extremely difficult. So why the title, The Serpent and the Rainbow? Well, in voodoo, the serpent is the creator of the earth, and the serpent marries the rainbow spirit. And so the religious beliefs of Haiti have a lot to do with different gods and goddesses, and this blurring of the lines between our world and the spiritual world. And all of this combined with this, zombie powder that was made from, not just the pufferfish, but the bones of children. And I mean, there's a whole ritual around all of this. And if it weren't for this ritual and these secret societies and this deep-seated belief in this culture, there's no way that you could convince somebody that they were a zombie, right? Like if you just rub this powder on someone, you're like, you're a zombie now. They're like, what? So it was just, it's a fascinating read. And it's a fascinating story. It goes a lot into the history of Haiti and the culture, but if you're interested, I would definitely recommend it. So,
Cat, I have a question about that.
Sure.
So, am I understanding correctly that the sort of medicine man, I forget the name, it starts with a B, Bokor would have this powder, and that somehow he would get it on or in somebody, that person would die,
yes.
He'd be buried, and then there was this whole like sub business of literally business enterprise of digging that person up and then spiriting that individual away to become a slave.
Yes.
Holy cow. So, and what role does datura play in that?
Well, datura is fed to the folks once they are dug up and basically convinced that they have become zombies. You feed them datura, then they get these hallucinations, they get tremors, they're more susceptible to suggestion because they're hallucinating. And so you do this ritual where you dig them up and you say, basically, your soul is under our control now. And so this is your life now. And so a lot of times they're sent to work on sugar plantations or, just to do some menial labor. And Claudius or Clairvius, I'm sorry, I keep messing up his name, but Clairvius wandered off the sugar plantation once the owner of the plantation died. And he kind of worked his way back to his old village and ran into his sister. And she was asking him questions that only he would know the answers to. And she went, "Oh my gosh, it's my brother." So yeah, but he was shunned by the village. And then there are other stories of documented folks. What's so fascinating about this is that the zombie legend had been around for a while, but no one had any true documentation of it. So Clarius, I mean, he was at an American hospital and they declared him dead and, wrapped him up and they sent him off for burial. They had doctors that said he is dead because his heart rate was so low. His pupils were fixed and dilated, so he passed as being dead. And he talks about being conscious as they put him in a coffin, lower him into the ground, and cover him with dirt. And being there when they nailed the spike in and it cut him on the cheek. He still has that scar. You can see it in the picture. Yeah, and so he's convinced that he's dead, but his soul is still with him. And when the Bokurs dig him up, he believes it because it's part of the culture. And then he's fed these psychoactive substances and, basically gets brainwashed into it. And so, these folks come back to their villages or they show up places and it's mind-boggling. But yeah, it has a lot to do with the culture. The Harvard article, I would recommend it, and it's in my references, but this guy here goes into much greater detail. It talks about other cases, and how all of that works. It's the secrets of Haiti's living dead. And then they talk about the preparation of the powder and, the collection of the ingredients and then all of the ceremonies that go into it. And so, when Davis talks about cultural beliefs and forces, it's no lie, because people get exposed to tetrodotoxin all the time. But because of the ceremony, because of the belief system, because of these secret societies that everybody knows but no one talks about, it's this perfect storm. And so that's how all of this came to be. It's fascinating.
And so it sounds like the B guy, the guy who's, I can't remember his name. The Bokur, is actually quite an excellent chemist. And to know more or less how much of this ingredient, that ingredient, so the person doesn't actually die there.
Well, it's not always successful. It's not great. So because they're just kind of eyeballing it, right? They're not measuring stuff out. They're just, they're throwing it together. That's possibly unkind, but they're creating these powders, but yeah, it's not always great. Sometimes it kills the victims. Sometimes there's no effect because they didn't put in, enough. And it's just, it's a crazy story, and it's real, and it's a real thing that happens. But it was kept from, modern civilization, because of these secret societies. And Wade Davis discusses how he was able to, I don't know if infiltrate's the right word, because he was invited in, but I think because he was so open to learning about the culture and understanding the history, and he wasn't coming at it with a judgmental nature. He really just wanted to learn about it and discover if this was really a thing that was happening. And so the secret society said, yes, you can come to our meetings, you can see our ceremonies. And his show of bravado with Marcel, who has a shady reputation at best, was what convinced Marcel that, this white man can hang with the boys. And so, he was super impressed when Wade Davis pretended, he didn't know he pretended, but when he took that real powder, and basically called his bluff. And that's what convinced Marcel, I'm going to show you how we do this. There is an antidote, and I'm using really strong air quotes when I say antidote, because there's nothing in the antidote that is actually an antidote. As we know, there's no antidote to tetrodotoxin poisoning. And so when you raise these people from the dead, you're feeding them datura and basically telling them that this will save you, this will help you, but but your soul belongs to us now. So yeah, so there's a huge cultural biochemistry crossover here, which is fascinating.
Well, thank you for diving into that a little bit more. Any other questions so far?
Everyone's just blown away, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think you're right.
What? Yeah, just blown away by that little revelation I dropped on everyone just now. So, but it is a fascinating story, and I do recommend that you dive into it. It's something that I knew very little about, and once I read the book, I went, "Oh my gosh!" I already thought tetrodotoxin was pretty neat, and then this just sealed it for me. It's why it's my favorite. But yeah, I would recommend the Harvard article. It's not very long, but it gives an excellent history and talks about the main players, and also gives you some more insight into the voodoo culture of Haiti, which is, it's just fascinating.
We might have a question. Melinda might have a question.
Okay.
Yeah, Dick's got the question.
Dick's got the question. Thanks, Dick.
Are pufferfish found worldwide, or are they restricted to the tropics, or restricted to the Red Sea, or where are they found?
They're found, well, clearly they're not found in the Arctic. They can't survive there, but they're found in the warmer waters on the East Coast and also on the West Coast. They're around the coast of Africa, Australia, New Zealand. So they're found just about anywhere except where the water gets extremely cold. My grandmother has a place in South Florida, and I fish off her dock, and I pull in pufferfish all the time. I am super careful when I handle them, though, because not only am I aware that they may secrete toxin, and I definitely don't eat them, no way, throw them back, but they've got those teeth. So getting the hook out of there, I'm always afraid I'm going to lose a finger, like that whole Charlie bit my finger thing at the dentist. And so I'm very terrified of that. But yeah, they're pretty much found everywhere in any ocean environment that is warm enough for their populations to breed. So yeah, that's a good question.
And how long they can be buried before being brought up?
Oh, all right. So Melinda has a question then, Kristen.
Okay.
All right.
How long, I mean, given that everything's done right and the guy gets buried but is going to be alive, what kind of time period is there for digging him back up? Is it within
24 hours? It's 24 hours.
24 hours. Okay.
Yep. So they usually bury them in the evening, and the next night they go in and dig them up. Yep. They talk more about the ceremony in the book, but usually it's about 24 hours or so. Any longer than that, and you can have asphyxiation and hypoxia. So yeah. And then, of course, sometimes you open up the casket and you realize you used too much tetrodotoxin. And so, it's all for naught. But yeah, it's usually, I'd say, between 12 and 24 hours, usually 24. Mm-hmm.
So we assume that this came via the slave trade, that the powder already existed in West Africa, and actually, or the knowledge of how to do it came from West Africa via the slave trade?
Yes. And it's a cultural melting pot from the Caribbean islanders who were already there with the and their voodoo religion, and also the religion that was brought over from the slave trade. And it's this melting pot of these two different, well, and it's more than two, but these multiple cultures, multiple belief systems. But yeah, it is thought that the recipe for this zombie powder came over from Africa on during the slave trade. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from either Melinda or Dick or anybody else right now?
Yeah. Thank you for those questions, Melinda.
Yeah.
That was really good. Those are good questions.
Yeah, we need to get some powder for Putin.
Well, it was originally believed, that if you sprinkled the powder across the bottom of the doorway, that your victim would step on it without even knowing, and then they would succumb. That ended up being just sort of the legend, because a lot of people wear shoes, and it's not like the powder can work its way up through shoes. And also, if someone walks across the threshold, that is not your victim. That is a real bummer. So yeah, and so there's lots of other ways that you can administer this toxin. But if someone wants to volunteer and just you might, I don't know if Marcel is still around, but you could possibly hire a Bocor. I'd save us all a lot of grief. So don't make this at home. Please do not try making this at home and turning your friends and family into zombies. I highly discourage this. Please don't do this. Also, I don't know if we have the cultural, our zombies are much different from Haitian zombies. And so even if you are able to get some powder on your intended victim, I don't think this would have the intended effect at all. So it's one of those don't try this at home moments. Any other questions besides how to poison people? Remember, that's not what this lecture series was supposed to be about. It was not about murder.
We don't have any questions in the chat or comments in the chat at this point.
Okay, well then I guess we'll move on. But again, I can't recommend this book enough. So check it out if I have piqued your interest. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is tetrodotoxin as a potential therapeutic agent. And I'm sure you're thinking, what? We just talked about making zombies. How in the world could this toxin be therapeutic at all? Well, we also remember if we talked about the subtypes of sodium channels and how our sodium channels are able to be bound by tetrodotoxin, whereas the animals that have this toxin in their bodies have mutations that allow them to stay away from getting these symptoms. But it turns out that certain subtypes of sodium channels are associated with the generation and propagation of pain. And so there has been some research coming out about using tetrodotoxin as a potential pain management medicine. And if you provide tetrodotoxin at low enough doses, it could be effective for pain management, specifically cancer-related pain and neuropathic pain. And in the bottom corner, this little picture here, this is what your sodium channels look like. So it's got lots of different proteins that are basically put together to create what's the sodium channel that's in your body. And sodium channels actually come in a lot of different flavors. So you have sodium channel variant 1.1. This is found in your central nervous system, microglia, the peripheral nervous system, and ventricular cardiomyocytes, which are the muscle cells that are in the ventricles of your heart. And it's associated with chronic pain, chronic visceral hypersensitivity, colorectal cancer, ovarian cancer. So if you could have a tetrodotoxin molecule that was specific to sodium voltage channel 1.1, you could potentially modulate the pain affiliated with those pathologies. Moving on, sodium voltage channel 1.2 is found in your central nervous system, low expressions in your peripheral nervous system. SC is sarcolemma, and ventricular cardiomyocytes again. So associated pathologies are ovarian cancer. Again, if you can somehow shut down this particular sodium channel at low doses, you could potentially handle with the pain associated with ovarian cancer. And the list goes on and on. So those are your particular sodium channel subtypes, and the tetrodotoxin could potentially target those and alleviate pain affiliated with pathologies. So at therapeutic doses, tetrodotoxin lacks the affinity for sodium voltage channel 1.5. And this is the sodium channel that's expressed in cardiac muscle cells. So what's super nice about that is that you could give tetrodotoxin to patients at super low levels for pain modulation, but it won't affect their cardiac cells, so it won't mess up your heart rate, which is really nice. One hurdle is that the therapeutic index of tetrodotoxin is really low due to its high toxicity. So the dosing of that's going to be extremely difficult because just a little too much, and well, we all know what happens. Another hurdle is that tetrodotoxin is extremely difficult to synthesize in the lab and must currently be harvested from marine animals, mainly pufferfish. I read somewhere that the percent yield, if you do this in an organic chemistry lab and try and synthesize it, is roughly 3%, which is just awful. So you're wasting a lot of resources to get very little molecules. So it's just much easier to harvest it from marine animals at this point. Maybe someone will come up with a really cool way to synthesize it, but I haven't seen it yet. There are still questions as to whether tetrodotoxin can cross the blood-brain barrier. And that's an important thing to know if you're going to start giving people therapeutics for pain. So studies are still out on that one, and much more research needs to be done. But right now in animal models, specifically mice and rats, this is looking pretty promising. And there are thoughts that you could increase the therapeutic index of tetrodotoxin by administering it with vasodilators and some other, medicines that you can administer with it. And also it appears that the oral dose is much more effective than something like an intramuscular injection. But again, the studies are brand new, things are still coming out, and there's tons of more research that needs to be done. Questions on that? A lot more of a biochemical dive than I thought you guys would like, but I thought it was super interesting.
It is super interesting. I'm not seeing any questions about it at this point, unless somebody wants to unmute and ask a question. Did I just scare you all?
I think I scared everybody. So we're going to move on and make things a little less scary. So if you were here for the botulinum lecture, I'm sure that during this talk you noticed that there's a lot of similarities to tetrodotoxin and botulinum. So I want you to put on your toxicology hats and think about the fact that both of them are neurotoxins. Both of them prevent the release of acetylcholine. Both cause flaccid paralysis. The mechanisms are different, but the results are the same. Anyone have any thoughts on this? No wrong answers. Just, wanted everyone to kind of think like a toxicologist. Or not, I don't know. No? All right, well, I don't imagine people in the future will be injecting tetrodotoxin in their faces in order to relieve their wrinkles. I think botulinum is a much better bet for that. And I've never heard anyone using botulinum to, subdue an opponent and turn them into sugarcane slave labor. But again, people find interesting and horrible ways to do terrible things to each other. So maybe this is a thing that will happen. I doubt it, but you never know. But I just wanted you guys to think about that and sort of ruminate on why we do this lecture series and how all of these toxins are in some way related to each other and also have potential for medicinal uses. So it's fascinating how people have taken some of the most toxic chemicals and proteins on the planet and have turned them into something that's beneficial to people. So because if you remember, botulinum is the most toxic protein on the planet, and tetrodotoxin is the most potent eukaryotic molecule on the planet. So I'm giving you the heavy hitters. You're welcome. So I think if there's no questions, we're going to end on something really kind of fun. And it's the fact that dolphins like getting high. So using a remote control camera, biologists caught dolphins sucking on pufferfish. And then they pass it around to each other. So if I can get this link to work, I thought you would enjoy a video of dolphins getting high. Can everyone see it okay?
But something far more extraordinary seems
We can't see the video.
Oh no! Oh,
I
I wonder
think
if
I
I'll
think
share my desktop then. Oh, here it is. Okay. So, okay. All right. Can you see it now?
yes.
Okay. So we're gonna watch dolphins getting high.
More extraordinary seems to be happening. When attacked, pufferfish release a neurotoxin. In high doses it can kill, but in small doses it has a narcotic effect. It seems to be affecting the dolphins. They appear totally blissed out by the whole experience. And remarkably, all take turns in passing the puffer around. This is the first time that apparent recreational drug use has been documented in dolphins. With the dolphins otherwise engaged, the puffer deflates. He's free to go on his way. It looks like they will be distracted for quite some time.
So,
That's the puffer.
so that's a thing that happens. Let me get back to my.
Well,
Yeah.
So I have a question about that. So are they actually getting high? I mean, if you put like a basketball in there or a volleyball, would they play around with it in the same kind of
they will
way?
play
Or
around with it, but so remember we talked about how some of those sodium channels cause pain relief.
Mhm.
Well, that's what's happening. The puffer is secreting some of the tetrodotoxin from its skin. Again, not enough
Oh.
to cause, the later stages of tetrodotoxin poisoning, which would, do us under. But because the dolphins have a larger body mass and the dose is so much smaller, they're getting that. It's like getting an opioid high. And so that's what these dolphins are doing with this puffer fish. And I think it's sweet that they, don't kill the puffer because I think they know that would be bad news bears. But instead, they're, chewing on the skin a little bit just to get a little bit of that tetrodotoxin exposure, which, results in an analgesic effect.
Kind of like fugu? Is that how you pronounce
it's like
it?
the fugu, right?
Yeah, fugu.
Yeah, so if you're eating the fugu and you get these paresthesias and it's kind of exhilarating and it's kind of cool and there may be a bit of an analgesic effect as well. This is a new phenomenon that researchers went, what? Dolphins getting high? And it's cute. They pass the puffer around. To, little group getting high session in dolphins. So yeah, I just thought that would be a fun way to end it. That the story isn't all doom and gloom. And as always, there's the poison helpline and the pet poison helpline. So if you are exposed to a toxin, your chances of being exposed to tetrodotoxin are extremely low. But for anything else that we've talked about, if you're concerned, these are the helplines as the numbers. And then finally, here are the resources. So I also wanted to plug another book besides Serpent in the Rainbow. If you're interested more in deadliest creatures, because this is one of our creature episodes. So so far we have done an atomic element, arsenic. We have done bacteria, botulism, and now we have also done the pufferfish. So we've done an animal, and the next one is going to be on the death cap mushroom. So we're going to wrap it all up with a fungus. So we've kind of hit the highlights here. But if you're interested in dangerous animals that produce toxins, I would recommend this book here called Venomous. And it's how Earth's deadliest creatures mastered biochemistry. So as a nerdy chemist, of course, I thought it was fascinating, but if as a layman, it's also a really good summary of some of the most toxic animals in the world and how they got to be that way. We don't really talk about that side of the story, but the evolutionary pressures, the biochemical diversity that has led to these animals having some of the most potent toxins in the world. And so it's a great little book if you're interested in this particular niche of venomous animals. So that is all I have for Tetrodotoxin. I hope everyone had fun and learned some stuff. And I promised several people it would not disappoint. I hope I came through on that.
Now, I'm wondering if anybody has any questions at this point, now that they've seen your whole presentation.
I'll put it back on the, and if you're interested in that Harvard article, it is available online. Go to Harvard Magazine, and it's called Are Zombies Real? And you can read the whole thing if you don't want to do the deep dive of Serpent at the Rainbow. So yeah, but it's a great article, and it's just a fascinating tale. But yeah, that's Harvard Magazine because Wade Davis went to Harvard. So, and I'll put the poison numbers back up. So yeah, I would love questions. If anyone has any comments.
An observation.
Yes.
I used to be a diver and fish collector for Scripps Institute of Oceanography, and I've collected pufferfish for aquaria display. And when we would actually handle a pufferfish in its environment, it really blew up into almost a large spherical shape. Yep. And I'm noticing that the pufferfish that the dolphins were passing around didn't seem to be blown to its full capacity.
No, it was not.
And so, you wonder, does the puff? I mean, obviously blowing themselves up is a defense mechanism. Something's going to come eat you, and you blow yourself up, so you can't fit in the mouth, type of thing. But for some reason, that didn't happen with that pufferfish. I wonder if there's some symbiotic relationship where the pufferfish gets something out of being passed around and doesn't activate its defense mechanism for whatever reason.
Well, I was thinking that too when I saw the video, because they usually just get like boom around. And so I thought, well, maybe the pufferfish knows that the dolphins are not a threat per se versus something like a shark. Because I just don't know if pufferfish are really on the menu for dolphins. I don't imagine that they would be, because they are, pretty toxic. But, for a dolphin could probably handle that level of toxin. But yeah, the pufferfish didn't seem to be too upset about the whole thing, which was a little surprising. And it didn't get that full inflate. So I wish I knew more about that and the relationship between the pufferfish and the dolphin, besides dolphins just wanting to get high. So it would be worth a little bit more inquiry for sure. But that's very cool. Scripps is awesome. So nice work.
And Liz just asked if she had some interruptions during this presentation. She thought it was a great presentation, and she asked if there's a way to watch it again. And yes, I'll be doing some light editing, kind of the front end and back end, and posting it on the library's website, probably the first of the week. You folks will also get an email, since those of you who signed up through me, you'll get an email with these resources, the serpent and the rainbow, the poison hotline, the resources information that Cat just showed you, and the books that were mentioned. So yeah. Any other questions before we bid adieu to our forensic chemist for this month?
Did I just like blow your mind between zombies and puffer dental work and getting high with dolphins. I mean, you can probably see why this is my favorite. I was so excited for this one. Yeah, there's just a lot to this besides just being an extremely potent toxin. There's just a lot of cultural and really fun scientific stuff that goes along with this one. So.
Merlin says, heard of zombie fungus, but zombie fish is new.
Yes.
Thanks, Merlin.
Thanks, Merlin.
Yeah.
Hope you're feeling better. Yeah, I would love to talk more about zombie fungus because that's a whole other mind blower. But yeah, the zombie part of the tetrodotoxin story is just fascinating. So yeah.
And next time it will be the death cap mushroom, the amanita, I believe.
It will.
Yep.
That's also going to be a fun one. Not only because the biochemistry is super interesting, but the story of it and the fungal life cycle. I mean, it's all very interesting. And I had to do some research on that one because I'm not a fungal expert at all. But I really enjoyed the research for it, and I learned a whole bunch. And yeah, I think it's going to be a really fun one to close on.
Yep, and that'll be April 7th. I just looked at my calendar. So
I hope to see everybody there.
Yeah. So, oh, wait a second. This is Merlin again. When the dolphins are kicking the pufferfish around like a hacky sack at Coachella, it deflates so that it can absorb the hits and not burst. That makes sense.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Merlin. That was a good insight. I was, didn't even really occur to me that the poor little fellow would pop.
Yeah.
Poor little. Yeah. Hacky sack. That was awesome. I have the best audience. You guys are the greatest. So yeah, that's a good point. Didn't even occur to me.
Well, wonderful. Any other last minute comments or questions for Cat? A pregnant pause to give people a chance to grab their keyboard. Well, I guess not. So thank you, Cat. A big virtual round of applause. This was a wonderful talk. And we'll look forward to seeing everybody here April 7th for the death cap mushroom.
Yay!
So thank you very much, Cat.
Thanks, everybody.